One of my favorite aspects of landscaping is pruning and maintenance of ornamental shrubbery. This is one of the greatest strengths that we have as a business, and I truly believe that this is a dying art form. We need to communicate this knowledge with the younger generation so we can continue to have beautiful landscapes all around this world. Welcome everybody to another video. This one is going to be the second part of the pruning series for Green World over here at Hughes Gardening. Definitely like and subscribe as always. So I want to recap a little bit from the hand pruning video just to talk about what we've learned, because it's going to play into how we identify and end up shearing plants in our landscape. So to recap what's going on here, the number one thing on hand pruning is identify the ornamentals that require hand pruning. I'm not going to go back through every single plant that we believe needs to be pruned by hand, but the general rule of thumb is that if it's a plant like a rose or like a hydrangea or anything that has a hard flowering end to a single branch, that's going to be something that you're going to be best suited to hand prune, because the likelihood of all those flowers being spent at the same time is not very high. So more than likely you'll be in there selectively clipping and or deadheading that plant and selectively pruning it while you do. So another thing is too, that brings me into this, which is selective cuts. So another way to think about what needs to be hand pruned versus what needs to be sheared is, if you're looking at the ornamental and you have really irregular growth, well, that's going to mean that you're going to want to selectively prune that irregular growth out of that plant, and that will involve a pair of hand clippers, etc. So, you know, you've got your plant here, it's growing, it's in a nice little form, natural form, and you've got a bunch of, you know, a couple of leaders over here that need to be cut out, and what you're gonna do is break your hand pruners out and cut those leaders into the meat of that plant. And that would be something that would warrant hand pruners. So, you know, that right there kind of goes into our next recap, which is natural form. So the theme of a landscape is very important when identifying whether or not you're going to selectively prune, aka hand prune, or shear, because if you look around the landscape and everything is kind of themed to be fluffy and wispy, but yet still under control, more like the way you would find it in nature, that is going to be a property where you will honor that form and prune selectively by hand. And that really is going to be on a case-by-case basis. Now, like I said, with roses and hydrangeas and things like that, and camellias, you can have a landscape full of sheared plant material. Everything looks razor sharp, and then you have several things that are hard flowering plants that have a natural form. So that definitely requires you to do step number one. But, you know, it's possible for you or a client to want to break up the monotony of the landscape by having some things that are naturally kind of formed and some things that are very regimented and sheared. So natural form is another thing that you will get through hand pruning. Number 4, this one, in my opinion, is probably, from my point of view, it's extremely important to mention. Easy clean up. So when you're hand pruning, you're going to be grabbing a piece of a plant and clipping it. And so that makes the cleanup extremely easy. So you're gonna lose a bunch of time by individually cutting things, but you're gonna gain a lot of that back when you go to clean up your debris, because it's all going to be very easy to get your hands on because you already are grabbing it to cut it. So that's really all I'm gonna go through, just recapping the hand pruning. Now we'll get to shearing. And so I'm gonna title this SHEARTOWN. So that's where we are now. We're in SHEARTOWN, the land of the machines and the scissor shears. And so what we really wanna talk about are the steps. And so the steps are going to be, you wanna identify old growth. So when you're going to shear a plant, you're going to see if the plant has been sheared before. You'll be able to see the original line where the person before you or you ran a pruning machine over that plant and got it all nice and level and tight. And what happens is you draw that hard edge on there with your machine, and then everything grows from that point. Seems like common sense, right? But it's really not. And so you're gonna draw that line, and then the new growth emerges from that. And you'll be able to look inside that plant and see the difference between the darker green, older growth, which is gonna be hardened off and maybe even a little woody, and the soft basal growth that emerges from that. So when you identify that old growth, then you kind of know where your line is that you need to trace, and you're ready to rock and roll. Obviously, once you've identified the old growth, so start with the top of the ornamental, because that's how you're gonna flow into your sides. And when you do start, so you always wanna prune your high side of the plant first, because if you start on the lower side and you prune it as hard as you can, there's no guarantee that you're gonna be able to shear the higher side of that plant without making it bald, AKA cutting into the woody growth. So if you roll up and you've got a hedge that's kind of shaped like this, it's higher on one side and then lower on the other, and you can see the line where it was pruned before that, you're gonna start here and cut that side, because then you're going to flow into this other side that hasn't really grown, and that will give you a better product. So shearing the sides, very important step. You don't want to undercut the plant. So let's say this is a cross section of a hedge, right? And you're gonna say it runs this way, something like that right there, cross section of a hedge. So when you prune the sides of this plant, you'll have a bunch of like kind of growth going out right here. You wanna make sure that it stays vertical and it doesn't go in like that, because when you do that, the sunlight from up here can't make it to this lower part because the top of the plant is overhanging it. So vertical is very important on the sides. Another thing that's really important on the sides is to prune off structure. So we have hedges that are planted in front of our houses to decorate them. You wanna make sure that you get a solid cut in between the backside of that plant and your structure so air can move and it doesn't get all moldy, and yeah, it's just not a good look for the house. So prune off the structures. Okay, once you've done the sides, then you're going to round your edges. Now in the more modern houses and things like that, the really sharp angles are in style right now. I'm not a big fan, but they are. And so you're gonna see a lot of kind of hard angles, like 90-degree angles on plants, but a lot of them are not like that, and you're gonna have to slightly round the edges out once you get done pruning the sides. And that just makes it so, once the plant grows an inch, it's not gonna look like the whole thing needs to be sheared if the edges are slightly rounded. If the edges are sharp, then anything that sticks out of that plant is going to tell you, hey, this thing needs to be cut, it's been let go. And so it buys you more time with rounded edges. In my opinion, it's just a little bit more realistic way of pruning for longevity. 6, well, that's gonna be cleanup. All right, so cleanup with pruning is no joke. But the concept is getting the debris, the vegetative debris off of the surface of the plant. And so you can use a rake for that. You kind of have to sweep almost the top of the plant. You can try it with a leaf blower. It doesn't work that great, but it does okay. Another way is by grabbing the main trunks of the plant and shaking it vigorously. You don't want to shake it too hard so you're breaking trunks of plant, but you know, that does work as well. And that especially works well in the hedges that are, you know, 12, 13, 14 feet tall, because you know, it's just too much to be up there with the rake. So getting inside that plant and shaking it will do the trick. So that's pretty much the processes of it, you know, and you know, I guess the benefits are kind of what I'll cover down here. And the benefit is you're pruning in bulk. You can fly when you're pruning. You can cover a lot of area very quickly. Where it costs you is on the cleanup, because it's very hard to clean that trash up once you're done. I'll definitely say it's harder on your body. It's physically harder to wield a pruning machine. They're not exactly light. So that's another thing. You know, this is gonna give you a more manicured look, manicured type formal look. That's what you're gonna achieve with the pruning machine. And then I guess the last thing would be is regular growth. And what I mean by that is it's not gonna be a mystery to you what you're gonna have to do on your property to maintain your hedges if you're shearing them, because once that line is drawn on that plant, all the growth comes from that point. And so, you know, you might have a year or a month where you have a little bit more growth than the month before that, but ultimately it's gonna be the same process every time. Whereas, you know, with hand pruning, you never know what you're going to end up having to do to that plant the following time you hand prune it. And that's why you see people doing hand pruning more regularly on their property, especially if they're older. Because that'll be something that, you know, maybe 2 days a week, the homeowner goes outside and clips leaders off plants. And so it's a better way to chip away at your pruning if you're a homeowner hand pruning, but this is the way to do it if you got like 1 day every 2 months to get things done. So anyway, that was a lot of information. I hope a lot of it made sense. We're gonna accompany all this info with some clips of you know, myself and the boys doing a bunch of pruning. I hope you enjoy it. Keep an eye out for more videos coming your way. We're gonna do another irrigation centered video, small one for you guys here in the next week or so. And then we're gonna do a video hopefully on planting in new landscapes and just in general following that, because I know you guys are gonna be doing a lot of planting this fall. And so we wanna make sure that we've got you equipped to do so. Anyway, thank you. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and shout out to Bob, the editor, for making all this possible. Appreciate it. See you later.